In the state propaganda of America's adversaries, there is this persistent narrative line that, for example, Russia has to hold out just a little while longer, maybe a decade, and America will surely collapse under its own weight, under the weight of its national debt, its wasteful spending, and administrative inefficiency. And honestly, at times, it almost seems true enough, looking at our massive budget deficits that seem to be only ever growing, and the government's inability to do anything about them. I think it is Senator Rand Paul who popularized the saying that we have two political parties, one that doesn't care about the deficit and one that pretends to care. And then you see news articles like this one about how in California they spent billions on a high-speed rail line, and this is what they got for their money. A random piece of overpass in the middle of nowhere, connected to nothing. Or this one where they spent $7.5 billion on installing charging stations for electric cars, and how that money bought us 7 charging stations in 2 years. Or this one where the Biden administration spent $42 billion, more than the entire military budget of countries like Italy and South Korea, on expanding broadband internet access, and how not a single person was connected to the internet through the program. The debt servicing obligations have now surpassed $1 trillion per year. That's just to pay interest on the already existing debt. Serious attempts to pay off the debt are not being made anymore, and even reducing the deficit to zero and stop getting further into debt seems completely unrealistic. It is easy to see how someone can think that the United States is slowly suffocating from all the inefficiency, consulting fees, various middlemen, the modern version of medieval coin clippers, taking a cut here and there, so that in the end nothing gets accomplished at all. Russia has to hold out just a little while longer, so the propaganda goes, until America finally crumbles under its own weight, and then we will take our revenge for the Cold War. Anyway, that's just a propaganda line. But when Trump returned to power and announced the creation of the Department of Government Efficiency, it sounded like something that the country sorely needed. During his first term, Trump had to ask establishment Republicans for recommendations for cabinet positions, being the political novice that he was. But this time around, he brought along with him a constellation of loyal individuals to put in charge of departments. A party of loyal king's men that has grown around the president during his time out of office. Among them, Elon Musk was brought in to head the Department of Government Efficiency, with the idea that he is going to use his technological know-how to clean up the machine of government, modernize the bureaucracy, and so on. Here it should be noted that this newly formed department really isn't one. It is technically only an advisory body that is tasked with producing recommendations, which means that its power is informal and that it is up to Elon Musk to make something of it. Businesses are known to go through a typical life cycle, from first introduction to growth to maturity to decline, eventually dying and making way for new, more efficient businesses who take their place. And that's okay. Employees find new employment, owners divest their assets, clients find a different business. But with a country, it doesn't work like that. We can't just all pack our bags and leave for a different country once this one has become old and crumbling. There is no way out of it but through, and in the history of all European countries, there are periods of reform where the system more or less violently purges itself of inefficiency. That was Elon Musk's task, and of course not the first time in the history of the English-speaking peoples that a new government brings in a scientifically minded individual like that to make reforms. The Department of Government Efficiency stands in parallel to the time Sir Isaac Newton, famous for discovering gravity and calculus, was brought into the government of England to address existing inefficiencies. Actually, the parallel runs somewhat deeper than that once you realize that Joe Biden is the second Catholic president of the United States. In 1688, the second Catholic king, since the Reformation, James II of England gets overthrown with consent of Parliament by William of Orange. The second Catholic head of state gets replaced by another Orange man. The parallel writes itself. At that point in time, England is in a bit of financial disarray. The two biggest problems were counterfeiting and coin clipping. The weight of the average coin was more or less to the required specifications, but because not all coins were perfectly measured, some weighed below average, some above. But if you clipped just a little bit off the edge, without getting too greedy, it was not noticeable at all. Though as you see here, some examples are more noticeable than others. But especially if you had a set of precise scales, you could weigh each coin, and if it was above average in weight, clip the edge. Maybe even if it was just average weight. After all, there are below average weight coins. Why can't it be this one too? A lot of coins pass through the hands of your average merchant middleman, and if they leave weighing just slightly less than before, who's really going to notice? Anyway, those people needed Isaac Newton was given the position of Warden of the Mint in 1696 and then made Master of the Mint in 1699. But the formal title wasn't actually that important. Traditionally, this position was given as a sinecure for someone to draw a comfy government salary from, not to actually enact change. But Isaac Newton took his role seriously. In the 1690s, they conducted a study on the condition of the money in circulation in England. And the first thing they found is that 20% of all English coins were counterfeited. At that time, coins were still hand-struck and often irregular, so it was relatively easy to produce fakes. In addition to that, coin clipping meant that people hoarded full-weight coins or melted them down for the metal, which means that soon the only coins in circulation would be clipped underweight ones. Already there was a shortage of currency throughout England, and the government was desperate to regain control over its money supply and prevent a general economic collapse. Isaac Newton used a team of private investigators like a sort of financial inquisition and went around the country gathering evidence on coin clippers. He was directly involved in the process and at some point went undercover himself. It should be said here, though, that while counterfeiting was high treason, punishable by hanging, drawing and quartering, actually convicting anyone of it was extremely difficult. The English legal system already back then had placed various barriers to prosecution. And so first, Isaac Newton had to win this battle of legal wit to be able to go after anyone. He had to go deep into English law to find ancient and formidable instruments of authority. The first edition of Newton's famous book, the Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica, where he describes the physical laws of motion, includes a draft letter regarding how to do this. For example, Newton had himself personally made a justice of the peace in all the home counties of England. Coin clippers and counterfeiters were found and prosecuted, and Isaac Newton oversaw in person the executions of several of the most prominent coin clippers. In 1696, they did the Great Recoinage. In order to restore trust in the currency, they had to recall and reissue the money in circulation. The newly issued silver coins were made to a precise standard and were harder to counterfeit, with a characteristic ridge pattern to make any clipping instantly obvious. Various other reforms, like fixing the exchange rate between gold and silver and moving the country towards a gold standard, meant that in the end, Isaac Newton saved the British government millions of pounds, which in the 17th century was a great deal of money. In addition, letting Britain's foremost scientific mind redesign the country's financial system put it decades ahead of the other European powers. The British pound became the most stable and trustworthy currency in Europe, which allowed Britain to borrow, invest and trade globally, establishing London as the world's financial capital. In time, this foundation would serve to make Britain the world's financial hegemon and provide the financial investment necessary to build the British Empire. That is one vision for what the Department of Government Efficiency could be, or could have been. So how is it doing? The higher estimates put the total amount saved by its work so far at 160 billion, a minor dent in the US budget. It is a fraction of the annual deficit and just about compensates for the amount by which the deficit grew last year. But to be fair, they haven't been doing it for that long. Only 4 months. 4 months into his work, Isaac Newton was just about conducting a study to find out the extent of the counterfeiting. His great recoinage took 3 years, the anti-counterfeiting measures took 5 to 6 years, and overall, the reforms and modernization took 10 years to implement. Isaac Newton stayed at his position as master of the mint for 30 years. It is true, of course, that things happen faster as time progresses, and what took 10 years in the 17th century would take less now. But how much can be expected after 4 months? 4 months since the Department of Government Efficiency began its work, it feels like they are pretty much where Isaac Newton was. The study has been conducted and the public is finding out the extent of the inefficiency. Lots of interesting facts have come out in the last 4 months, like the fact that federal employment records, 400 million individual files, are stored on paper inside what used to be a vast underground mining facility. The bureaucracy mines, where thousands toil, manually filling out forms to process things like retirement claims. The lack of technology means that the process is labor-intensive and time-consuming, which limits the number of files that can be processed each month and results in a massive backlog. No doubt other countries have something similar going on, but imagine the advantage America would have if we were the first to get rid of it. Real change still takes time as the lower levels of administration begin implementing the signals given from the top. But perhaps the biggest product of Elon's efforts, as he is leaving his position at the head of the department, is setting up a vehicle for the future that modernizes government operations. The changes that Isaac Newton set in motion took decades to take full effect. The period in English history from 1688 to 1730 is when Britain basically invents modernity. Following Isaac Newton's reforms and the subsequent rational restructuring of the government, there is this astonishing explosion. This is the moment at which the British Empire is really invented. The Acts of Union are signed in 1707. This is the moment at which England becomes a predominant world power. It is an astonishingly rapid change, because up to 1688, England is essentially almost a French satellite, and the ruling Stuart dynasty depends heavily upon the power of the French king Louis XIV. Within this astonishingly short period between the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and 1730, about 40 years, England turns itself into a power that more than rivals France. Britain's new vision of power is unlike that of France at the time, not based on absolutism and the overwhelming force of royal armies. Instead, it is heavily based on science, heavily based on commerce, on culture. The Great Hall of the Royal Naval Hospital in Greenwich, built around that time, has an impressive painted ceiling. Its centerpiece is the Assumption, the apotheosis of Queen Mary and King William, the king installed by the Glorious Revolution. He is wearing splendid armor and is depicted crushing the neck of the French King Louis XIV. But all around him there are the emblems of science, of the new mathematical discoveries. This is the New England of Isaac Newton, characterizing an age when the complete foundation of modern physics was laid down in a tiny period of time. This is the start of the story of the British Empire, its sudden explosion in military power that is built on a scientific foundation, a financial and commercial foundation that finds its symbolic echoes on the painted ceilings of great halls, where previously only biblical figures and kings were fit to be depicted. Some people may dismiss the Department of Government Efficiency, and sure, it is easy to dismiss it at this stage, but I am reminded of Romulus in Rudyard Kipling's poem, who looks at the wall of uninspired mud around his camp and sees in it the future greatness of Rome. And when his brother Remus leaps the wall and mocks its height and make, he guesses the future of it all and slays him for its sake. Like Romulus in the poem, you may look upon the Department of Government Efficiency, compare it to Isaac Newton's reforms, and see in it the first stones of the foundation of the American Empire being laid down in front of our very eyes. An empire based on technology, artificial intelligence, and space travel. But then you blink, and the vision is gone, and all you see is a story about how Elon Musk is paying off some woman he has had a child with. Maybe he should have done like Isaac Newton and stayed a virgin.